Alright, today we're going to go over watercolor painting techniques. First off, please put your first and last name and your shelf number on there, period, today's date, tonight. Okay. So, to start with, we're going to write some notes. Wet on dry is an even color. All one even, smooth value of color. Wet on wet makes fuzzy edges. Paper towel blotch removes some paint to make a texture. Salt makes a texture, and yes, we will actually apply salt to the wet paint. Sharpie underneath, Sharpie on top. Both of those, no outlining. You don't want to outline with Sharpie. Sharpie is to enhance your design. You're going to draw some hatching lines in there, or fill in some areas with Sharpie, maybe do some writing in Sharpie, but no outlining with Sharpie, please. And if you remember, a tint is the lightest version of a color, and a shade is a dark version of a color. So today we're going to try and go through our different techniques up here. The first thing we're going to do is wet on dry. So we're going to take and make a paint. Cannot take it straight out of this paint here. It is a watercolor. If you take it straight out of here, you don't have watercolor, you have just some thick paint, and you're going to go through this too fast. So I'm going to take my palette, I'm going to take my eyedropper, and I'm going to get an eyedropper full, fill it up, and then fill it into one of these wells. I don't care if you do the circle ones or the slanted ones, the rectangular ones, that's up to you what you want to do. I like the circular ones just because then it stays in a nice little puddle. Then I'm going to take a brush, and watercolors work best with soft brushes. You can see these are all pretty soft brushes. So I don't need a real big brush right now, so I'm going to go with this number 6. All of them are numbered on the handle. You can barely see it right there. There's the number 6 right there. So I'm going to use that one. I'm going to get it wet, so I'm just going to dip it in my cup of water. And now, it just depends on what color you want to use. You can use any color except black is not a color, remember that. And notice we don't have white. So in watercolor we don't have white. So I'm going to do green. So I'm just going to gently roll my paintbrush over the green and then put it in that puddle of water that I have. I'm going to run it across the edge to get it out of there, and I'm going to do that again. Get a little more paint color in there. And one more time, so just a little more. Now remember, watercolor is not going to be really strong on your color to start with. It looks pretty decent in here, but as we paint with it, you'll discover that it isn't. So now, I'm going to show you how to do an even value of color. I'm going to stay with my number 6 brush. If I had a bigger area to go with, I would go with a bigger brush, something like this one. If I have a smaller area, then I would go with an even smaller one. But I'm going to go with this medium-sized one here for this first box. And I'm going to paint with just the tip of the brush. I'm going to go across, drop down, and then I'm just barely catching the edge of where I left off so that it continuously moves this little drop. Now as I start to run out of paint, I go get more that's been mixed already with the water, And then I keep going back and forth again, so I get a nice even value all the way to the bottom. Now at the end here, I end up with that puddle. I'm going to clean off my brush a little bit, so I'm going to squish my brush around in the water, not smashing it at the bottom, and then I'm going to wrap my paper towel around the metal and wipe it up, and then I'm just going to go back over that puddle a little bit just to pull that out of there. You can't really see that, can you? Okay, now I got to let that dry before I can do the next layer. And you can barely see it. But it is one even value of color. Okay. Now, I'm not going to do wet on wet yet because that's right next to it. So I'm going to skip to paper towel blast. So I'm going to tear off a piece of my paper towel. So I have that ready. I'm going to add a little more green paint to that water of green. You can mix a new color if you want. I'm just going to make this darker so you can actually see what I'm doing. Try not to dig at your paint though. You just kind of let the paintbrush roll across the top to get that paint. So paper towel blotch. I get my water mixed with color, so it's the watercolor. I'm going to paint this section. Clean out my brush real quick. Before it dries, I'm going to wad up my paper towel and remove just a little bit of it in a few spots. And you should be able to see. I zoom in here. You can see there's darker areas and lighter areas because the paper towel blotted up the areas that I didn't want it to be in. So if you get a darker spot or put paint down where you don't want it to be, then just grab your paper towel real quick and blot it out. You might be able to get some of it, all of it, just make sure it hasn't dried yet. If it has, you're going to have a hard time getting that to come out. Next, I'm going to do my wet brush. My wet brush with Sharpie underneath. So I'm going to draw something with a Sharpie. And you can either do initials are okay, letters, writing is okay. So I think I'll do some writing. If I was to do an object, I don't want to outline it completely. And when I do my pencil, I have to really lightly so that it disappears. Let's see what I want to do. Okay, so I did not outline it. I drew a bunch of lines for something, for a part of a box. And I think I'll finish off back here. Oops, that was off. I'm fixing that there. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to mix up a new color because I don't feel like using green right now. You can stick with green if you want. Go red. So if you get a really light red, it's going to be a pink. So we'll see how pink this is. It's pretty pink. That's okay. And I just cover right on top of that Sharpie. I just did the wet on dry technique. Then I'm just going to pull that out. So that's a nice, easy way to get your details in there. If you can't get them with your paintbrush, you can do Sharpie. You could always do colored Sharpie as well. Or you can do Sharpie on top. But since this is wet, I'm going to wait for that. So there's your first 3 techniques. Once this is dry, I will show you the next 3.